Hola, chicos. So let's see if we can organize the huge production that Picasso created into different time periods, though it's different to kind of structure his production because he was always changing. So let's start with his early years. As we already mentioned, his birth was considered a miracle because he apparently was born as stillborn, and it was not until his uncle, who was there and apparently was smoking a cigar, when he puffed some smoke from that cigar, Picasso started to breathe again. So at the age of 14, he was already a master of color. This was a time of experimentation for him, and he primarily worked on human themes, and most of his paintings are quite dynamic. One of his biggest influences from this time would be his father, José Ruiz Blasco, who was an art teacher and assistant at the Escuela de Bellas Artes in Málaga, and he was also the curator of the town museum. His father was also his first teacher, but he outgrew him quickly, and that's one of the reasons why people think that his dad gave up painting. The first painting that we know of him is this one. He apparently started painting at the age of 10, and he used to say that he did not write, but he painted about the world, and that he never painted like a child, but more like an adult, as you can see here. Normally, when we are 10, we do things more connected to our surroundings, like our house or our garden or our friends. Anyway, from this section of early works, we also have this magnificent First Communion that he created when his family was living in Coruña, that's northwest of Spain, and he was only 15. The improvement from the Picador is very clear, and also we can see some other paintings that he created of an old fisherman and also his mom. Around this time, he also visited the Prado Museum for the first time, and he used to spend the summers in Malaga. And he started this entrance examination for the Loja School of Fine Arts that he finished in like a couple of hours, when normally people took months to do. And also he presented this work, Science and Charity, at the Fine Arts General Exhibition in Madrid, and that gained him some recognition and some small prizes. At his family's request, he started his studies at the San Fernando Academy of Fine Arts, but he soon leaves the academy because it was too inflexible for him. It was too academic. However, when he was supposed to be at school, he would do frequent visits to the Prado Museum. He goes back to Barcelona, and that's when he met his friend Manuel Pallares. At some point, he would say, everything I know, I learned it in the town of Pallares. When he was in Barcelona, he also went to this Catregats tavern, and that's when he meets his dear friend Casagemas, also Sabartés, the Reventos brothers, very many important people of the time, and that had a great impact in his art and life. He also does his first individual exhibition there in Els Catregats, and Casagemas, his friend, and him decide to go to Paris for the first time. From this time period, we have these two self-portraits. Then he goes once more to Paris with Casagemas again. That's when he meets Max Jacob. And on one of the times when he goes back to Spain, his friend Casagemas unfortunately commits suicide, and again that had a huge impact that we will see later on in his life and painting again. During his several trips to France, we can see some influences like Impressionism with Matisse, or the primitive type of art of Rousseau. And that's the two of them is a combination in this young girl wearing a large hat, and also this toilette. Okay. Another one that you have here, it's a combination of the two of them, but also an influence from, what do you think? Las Meninas. Yes, but what's the difference? Instead of a princess, what did he paint? He painted a prostitute, because that's how Picasso was like. Well, after the death of his friends and influenced by the sadness of the event, it's when the blue period starts, and we have some paintings of that time period. This is actually a very small type of painting. And all of the productions from the blue period have normally cold tonalities. They are all about marginal people, stylized, distorted figures, this melancholy, this idea of suffering. Normally the head and the body are decayed as well. And in one of his self-portraits, we can see also a very pessimistic type of Picasso, or also like this blue room, this gourmet, this sad man in blue. And in the meantime, in the middle of all this, he goes to Paris once more, and he's not, he doesn't have a lot of money, so he needs to share a room with Max Jacob. From this time period, we also have this painting known as the Two Sisters. During the blue period, we can see a lack of variation in tonalities and how he focuses in the importance of the elements instead, like in these beggars by the sea. If you look at the feet of the man in the center, if you pay attention to them, you can see they are very, very likely to what El Greco painted in his Polliation. So that was another great influence for him. More about this period is this La Vie, Life, where he shows a very pessimistic description of life, but also more than one point of view that he will emphasize later on in his Cubist phase. This drawing of what we call in Spanish an alcahueta, or a matchmaker in the worst possible sense, is not very welcoming. He did her blind of an eye, and her name is La Celestina, who is both a very important character but also book of the Spanish literature. This would be probably one of the last paintings from this period, and then he moves to the Rose period. He takes his fourth and final trip to Paris, and he moves to the area of Montmartre in the building known as Bateau Lavoir, that is placed in 13 Rue de Ravignan, which is still a very popular place. And it's also where, when he met Fernand, they stayed together until 1912, if you remember. But he also met poets, Guillaume Apollinaire and André Salmon, and started to frequent the circus. With this woman ironing, we can see all the features of this time period, like more combination of color, the evolution of forms that tend to be more rounded and not so angled. The faces are still showing indifference, and we can still see some melancholy themes, and the figures are quite languid still. And also we can see fragile expressions, melancholic mood, but the advance is obvious with the introduction of more color and softer colors. We can see how it gets brighter and brighter, and he gets more interested in the life of clowns and jugglers. So around 1905, he met brother and sister Leon Gertrustein, and the two of them introduced him to Henri Matisse, who was again another big influence for him. And they consider each other frenemies, and the influence in each other is obvious, like these two works. And then also Spain influenced Matisse, and he created this painting when he was here in Granada, and he visited the Alhambra. I myself have a copy of this painting in my house because I really, really like it. And then after meeting Matisse, he starts to worry more about doing something new. And that's when he starts working with Cubism. The idea is to look at an object through different perspectives in one single representation. So it's basically the fragmentation of 3D forms into flat areas of pattern and color. That way, the figures overlap and intertwine. The people say that there is an obvious influence also of African art and mask that he was so fascinated with. And then another influence would be Paul Cézanne, that would claim that there is no model, only color, and we can see that reflected in all of these paintings created by him. The influence of Cézanne in Cubism is obvious. You can see Paul Cézanne on the left, Georges Braque on the right, and then Picasso with this portrait of Kahnweiler, who was his main dealer throughout his whole life. So when he started this idea of Cubism, as we said, influenced by Matisse, he moves towards shapes more and starts to detach himself from the art produced by Matisse, and Les Demoiselles d'Avignon marks the start of Cubism. We can see the absence of connection among the figures, the inspiration from primitive art, Iberian art, the use of angled forms, how figures are reduced to geometrical elements, basically, and the greatest innovation of them all, like how, for example, the back of the body and the front of the head are seen at the same time. So again, several points of view. We can see the forehead, the nose, the profile, the eyes at the same time. That wouldn't be possible in regular, more conventional type of painting. And finally, the theatrical use of curtains that he would take from Velázquez and his painting The Spinners. His friendship with Georges Braque will mark again a turning point, and the two of them worked out the features of Cubism, which are these. Let's see them one by one. Abstract, because there are obvious differences with real forms, the broken mirror effect, rearranged, we don't need to explain this, geometrical forms, more than one point of view, we can see normally the front and the profile of the person, and finally simplified shapes, especially on the harlequin on the right hand side. Basically, it's just a collection of rectangles. Okay. After his beginning with Cubism, he also feels attracted by collage, and he creates his first collage. And that's the time around where he met Eva Well. After those years, he had a couple of convulsed type of years, because it's when he leaves Fernand and starts a relationship with Eva. His father dies. Braque has to go to war, and then Eva passes away too. He gets to meet people from the Russian ballet. That's when he meets Olga, and that's when he marries her. After that, he would also go through a surrealist phase, which is around the time where he met poet and critic André Breton, who was the head of the surrealist movement. And even though he was not participating directly with surrealism, his friendship with the surrealists involves him in group meetings. That's also the time when he would meet Marie-Thérèse. Around that time, you can see his life is quite hectic. He will also meet Dali because he decided to visit him during one of his trips to France, the first one actually. They admired each other, but they never got along too well. However, probably because the two of them had a very strong character. However, they seem to have influenced each other's art. So this is Dali representing Picasso, and this is Picasso through his surrealist face. Then again, we have a few more convulse years. He would spend some holidays in Spain. He separated from Olga. His daughter is born. He makes his friend Sabartès his secretary, but then there is this outbreak of the Spanish Civil War. He then decides to move to Mougins in Paris, in France. It's when he also meets Dora Maar, and then, as you know, the bombing of the city of Guernica that will influence and inspire him to create one of his most important masterpieces. From this time period, we have the late surrealist, and it's more going towards expressionism. And this magnificent piece of art that, if you were lucky enough, you could have seen in Madrid in the Museum Reina Sofia. As you know, its dimensions are huge, but we will talk more in detail at another moment about this painting, because I want you to think about it first. And finally, after the François period, where his mother dies and he announced his affiliation to the French Communist Party, it's when he starts, for example, exploring the different possibilities of lithographies like Goya would do. His first son, Claude, is with François is born. He begins also with pottery work. Paloma, his daughter with François, is also born. But then Picasso and François separate. However, Paloma, the daughter, and the name become really important for him because, as you know, the dove, the Paloma, the pigeon, is one of his most important and better known symbol. And also he used the symbol of the dove to be the main cover of this Congress in Paris for peace. And with this, we finish this section, and we will talk a little bit more about Picasso later on.